helper and supporter of what Lingos has been trying to do with project management. And he participated in the very early conversations. He was on the board of PM for NGOs for a while. And as long as I've known Eric, every time I've needed some help, some advice, some suggestions about anything to do with project management, he's always been very willing to take some time to try and help. So I'm really delighted that Eric is here with us all. And I'm just going to move us forward to the first slide. And Eric, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you. And I just can't say how much I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Eric. Over.
John, thank you very much. And I want to welcome everybody here today. For me, it's a real honor to be a part of this organization and has been since the start. So every nice thing John says about me, I could probably say twice about him. But it's, again, I'm honored to be a part of this conversation today. And I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington, and feel very blessed today that I can sit in my warm office and reach out across the world to people who have a common interest. John's already sort of given me an introduction, but I'll tell you just a little bit more about myself and why I'm involved in this talk today. So my business, Versatile Company, has been focused on project management for 25 years. Some of you may have seen these two books. They've been out over the last, say, 16 years and have been translated around the world. So that's sort of how John and I got to know each other, is some people that had read my books and invited me to be a part of Lingos and the PM for NGOs. And my firm, Versatile Company, we are all focused on project management. We teach project management mostly to government, nonprofit, and corporate interests in the United States. So we really don't stretch out beyond the U.S. boundaries very often. Our consulting practice is focused on the kinds of things we're actually going to be talking about today, which is how do you sustain project management? How do you not just teach somebody what it is, but actually get it into the fabric of the organization? And then technology-wise, I will say that there's all kinds of project management technology. Our focus is always Microsoft technology. There's a simple reason for that, and that is that we can make a business out of that. There's enough people using Microsoft technology out there that need help, and so there's a need for that that's profitable. So we focus on project management technology associated with Microsoft products. And so again, it's a great honor to be here today, and I just want to get moving. Our subject today is how do we make project management a habit, and talk about strategies for implementation. Now, I guess one thing that I'd like to experiment with here, and John, you can help me out a little bit, is I'd love to see people use the chat box to tell us where their location is today, just so we all have a sense of who's, where's our group today. So please just jump in there with the chat, okay? Oh, thank you. Arlington, London, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, okay, Durham, North Carolina, London, Baltimore, Minneapolis, D.C., Grand Rapids. Interesting. Snowy Denver, Colorado. Sarah, that's great. And so most of us here are U.S., it looks like. Oh, Senegal, thank you for jumping in and letting me know that we're pushing outside the boundaries. Okay, great. And John, you kind of top us all. Okay, Robert, thank you. Roberta, good. Thank you for being here. And okay, interesting, great group here. And I want to let you know that the format today is I've got a lot to say, but it's not going to take up the whole hour. And I would love to have any questions as we go along. And I've asked John to keep an eye on that, and feel free to interrupt me at some point if we need to talk about something. I'll be trying to keep an eye on the chat, but John, if I miss something, you go right ahead and interrupt, and we'll discuss questions as we go. We don't have to wait till the end. And so let's talk about habits of project management. First of all, we're going to talk about why I like the term habits, and then we'll jump into which habits do we want to create. And then the bulk of our topic today is going to be where do you start, and then what's the long-term journey? Because it's absolutely a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And so that's the format that we're going to follow today in terms of creating habits and sustaining project management. Now, on the topic of habits, I really enjoy this book, and I think that if you haven't seen it before, it's a great book. It's always worthwhile. This thing came out in the I think the early 80s, maybe late 70s, and great advice for anybody. So, but the reason I brought this today is just this term habits, and that is that what Covey said as he wrote this book is that effectiveness is a result of doing the right things consistently on a regular basis. In fact, doing things consistently on a regular basis, you can do fewer things if you're doing them on a regular basis than if you're just trying to do a great thing every once in a while. And we all know this if we've been trying to lose a few pounds. It's our habits that keep us slim and healthy, not that weekend hike up the mountain where we nearly collapsed, but we burned a lot of calories. And it's the same way with sustaining project management. So today our conversation is really going to be about the habits that we can engender in our organization. Okay. Now, the term that we often see associated with project management is maturity. And this comes from a number of different models, sort of theoretical models about how to improve project management in your organization. And all of these maturity models really had to do with how consistent are you at the practice. And every model, really the assumption is that you do things consistently, and the way you climb up the model of maturity, in other words, are you low maturity, medium maturity, high maturity, it's what types of practices you're consistent at. But the key here is consistency. And so in our discussion today, what we're going to be driving toward are sort of those minimal habits of effectiveness. And the reason for this is that if you're trying to build good PM practices, there's nothing like having them all around you. It's interesting that what we've seen over the years is that when we teach people project management for the first time, and much the way that PMD Pro does, when we teach project management for the first time, everybody in the room is a pioneer. And so they don't have anybody to learn from when they go back to their office. But if they're successful, 3 years later, if you visit their office, people are learning by watching. And that's really the best way to foster this skill set, is to have it in place. Because the best project managers that I've ever met are the ones who said, well, that's just the way we did it where I was working early in my career. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that it's so important to have organizational habits. Now let me speak to this second bullet for a minute, and that's the topic of certification. Believe me, I think that what we're doing with PMD Pro and certification is fantastic. For me, in the U.S., the project management certification is very common, PMI. But what I will say is that for the organizations that we've worked with, certification of individuals is much, much less important than the fact that people have consistent practice. Because it's the consistent practice that starts to build institutional knowledge, which is the third bullet here. So institutional knowledge is created by doing the same things with everybody over and over again. And you don't need to get certified by an external body to do that, to do things correctly. And so my bias, my advice for organizations that are trying to move forward is to focus on consistency of practice over certification every time. And we still teach people, you know, how to pass the PMP exam, but we always ask them, why do you want to get certified? Okay, so and this would actually be an interesting discussion point. Is there anything else, John? I appreciate your chat on that. Any other comments or questions on that particular point of view here around consistency in the organization versus certification?
Hi, Eric. It's John here. I mean, one reflection that I've had with NGOs in a lot of different places is that, and I totally agree with you, I mean, nobody is going to get less poor or suffer less because a project manager has a certification. So by itself, I mean, it's not going to be enough. But one real benefit that I've seen is where there is no common language to talk about projects, you know, the discipline of a certification program can help to develop that common language, which can then be elaborated into more consistent organizational practice. And another interesting area I found is that many people in developing countries don't have the option of doing any certification, Prince2 or PMP. So at a personal level, it allows people to show, you know, they've got 20 years of experience, but how can they show their knowledge and their skills? So I've seen people at an individual level really like doing a certification for that reason as well. Back to you, Eric.
Hey, and those are spot-on points, too. And I think particularly there's always the first person through the gate, and that's what PMD Pro is often addressing, is those pioneers who are bringing project management to their organizations. And certification does exactly what you just pointed out, which is it says to their peers, look, this person isn't just making this up. They have, you know, passed the exam. They've got an international organization that's telling them this is the way it's done, and you know, they have thousands and thousands of peers across the globe that are doing it this way. So I think certification really supports the pioneer. And so this webinar is mostly for those pioneers who are bringing it back to the organization. What can they do? And so just a question here that came in, is this view shared by organizations and companies? We see employment opportunities requiring certain certifications these days. You know, that's an interesting thing. There's certainly, and again, I'm a really U.S.-based point of view here. In the U.S., the Project Management Institute's PMP certification has had kind of a up and down journey over the years. Some folks do require it, particularly government agencies really recognize it. Some folks have gone beyond, they've kind of gone full circle and said, you know what, we've seen too many people that are certified that still can't do the job. So there's created some skepticism. And my emphasis here is not that, you know, I am PMP certified. Everybody on my team is certified. I respect people who are certified. I think it has all the individual benefits. But I'm going to tell you, if I'm giving advice to my client and they're running a bunch of projects, I'm going to tell them, don't focus on certification. Focus on having common practices and common habits, because it's when we all work, when we're all pulling in the same direction, that we lift the organization. And when we're all doing it, and we all, because, I mean, think about this. How many people have a university degree, and yet they don't agree on how they're going to do the work? And so they never really, as an organization, gain the consistency that they need to actually work as a team and create institutional knowledge. So that's really the emphasis I'm going to bring today, is it's not a knock on certification, but it's an emphasis on how do you build institutional practice, because that's what we're talking about. How do you implement project management over the long term? So thanks for your chat.
So Eric, John here. There's also another question in the chat. Sometimes the chat can go quite quickly. And Laura was asking, she said she really agrees, but how to verify consistent practice?
Good. Thanks, Laura. Actually, if I don't answer your question by the end of this webinar, ask it again, because that's what I should be doing. Okay? Hope you feel like I get your question answered. So let's take to the next step then and talk about what habits should we be focusing on. What habits do we build? This little diagram here to me represents what most of our organizations have. And this quite right away expands our focus from projects and managing a project to managing groups of projects. And I think that is where almost every organization is who has a focus on project management. They don't have one or two projects, they have many projects. So let's look at these three layers real quickly to set some of our terms, and then we'll use this as we go through. At the project management level, the lowest on my diagram, that's about effectiveness of managing tasks and resources to meet the goals of the organization. So we want that project to be managed well, to deliver the right outcomes, and to be efficient in the way that it delivers those outcomes. Okay? The program management level is really about coordination. Now, here's a terminology issue. Program in the language that I'm using here. So I just want to be super clear about the way I'm using this term program, because I know this term program is used differently, for instance, in the nonprofit NGO sector, and it can also be used differently on the very, very large commercial endeavors like building a new airplane, for example. But the key point I want to make with program management is it has to do with multi-project coordination, and that is often has to do with multi-project, spreading the same resources over multiple projects. And I think there's a lot of organizations that find themselves trying to get multiple projects done, all with the same folks. And so that we'll talk about that more about that later, but you can imagine that it's hard for that one project manager to be effective if what they're really losing is the attention of people who start working on other projects. And so that program management is the discipline of that coordination. Project portfolio management, it has to do with selecting the projects. Most organizations have far more needs than they have resources. And so the portfolio management function is to choose only those projects that we have the resources to support. And that means we need to be able to prioritize and make decisions and be able to say no to some things so that we can say yes to others. And so just to put that in the context, now we're going to focus first of all on that lowest level, the project management level. And so let's talk about what habits we should build here. You'll see that I've got those same three levels here in this diagram, and now I've added an outer ring that has people, process, technology, and organization. And quite simply, if these are the habits, the outer ring sort of describes the habits that I'm after. People who are doing the work need to understand the PM techniques, which is probably the biggest role that certification plays, right, is agreeing that what they learned is legitimate. The processes, so what are the consistent practices across projects, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my energy here, is trying to decide how do we build consistent practice, okay? So people know how to do it, and they use consistent practice. Now, the technology, which as you'll see in the diagram here, links people and process, enables the people, right? Enables people to actually follow the process. And finally, organization means somebody actually is paying attention to this and owns it. If you've got an accounting system and nobody looks after that accounting system, it's nobody's responsibility to make sure the accounting system works and that the books balance, I guarantee you the books don't balance. And this project management can be the same thing. If we're really trying to have long-term institutional improvement in project management, somebody has to own that and be responsible for that. Okay, so I'm going to walk through so we've kind of laid the big picture out here. This is the big target. Now I'm going to walk through the way I see this building up in any organization. Any questions about my diagram so far? Okay, outstanding. Thank you. So where do we start? Well, we start with people, and it's actually I think it's actually an important question because there's always sort of a chicken-egg dynamic when you start with a blank slate and say, well, what are we going to do? You know we need some project management around here. Where do we start? And excuse me. Just yesterday afternoon, in fact, I met with a small engineering firm, and they said, we don't have very good project management. What do we do? I said, let's start with some training so that people do have a common vocabulary. And they know they have a common vocabulary, they have a common belief in why is this valuable. Again, if they're not motivated, they're not going to do anything. And they know the techniques, they know the discipline, they know the practices, they know the theory, the concepts. So that's where we have to start, and you'll see that we start at the project management level. So we're going to ignore the top two levels. We'll get to those later, but we're going to start by focusing on the project level. So that's where we start. Now, you'll notice here that as you look at this picture of a LINGOs classroom, that everything on the wall, this is classic project management training. We have a lot of charts on the wall, a lot of paper on the wall, and we got a lot of Post-it notes. It's just funny because I almost wonder how in the world did we accomplish anything before we had Post-it notes. But somehow we did. Back in the early part of the 20th century, they still made some progress. But you notice how much we accelerated after Post-it notes were invented in the late 70s. However, my real point here is that when you're learning these principles, you notice that the role of technology is typically absent. And I think that's important because technology serves the practice and it serves the people. But if we introduce the technology too soon, and by that I typically mean project management software, people get focused on how does the tool work instead of really understanding the underlying practices and principles. And in fact, later this week, I'm going to be running a webinar on using SharePoint as a project management tool. And whether you use SharePoint or not, I know there's a lot of US-based people here. You might have SharePoint in your organization. We'll talk about kind of what are the project management practice objectives before we talk about actually how to use the software. So it's, but I think this is a perfect example of teaching people the practice of project management. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually bring their projects into the class.
Yeah, absolutely, Eric, wherever possible. I think that you don't want to learn in the abstract. And, if I want to learn how to use a tool like a screwdriver, I can read about it, I can do e-learning about it, but sooner or later I have to pick up a screwdriver and use it. So we try to work with people's own projects and give them a chance to begin building out examples of the tools for their own projects, and then it's immediately relevant and helpful for people, and they can relate to it. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, I consider that an absolute best practice, and that's absolutely the way we run our training anytime possible, is we have people working on their own projects or projects that they really relate to in the classroom, because that's where they begin to internalize why this has value. Okay, so that's the first start, training. People who need to know project management, they learn the practice in some way. And again, I think the certification validates for them that they are learning industry standard practice and that they've actually learned it. So that's a good thing. So the next piece is that I want you to understand, though, is that training on its own is often disappointing. And this diagram here with the lady in white shouldn't really surprise any of us. Good training is absolutely an accelerated learning event. I know for myself that I could sit in a class for 2 days and learn what it might take me 2 years to learn if I just had to do it by observing others or trying to read books and stumble through on my own. I mean, I've had that experience, and that's certainly what we try to accomplish for our customers, is to create an accelerated learning event. So we know that a classroom experience can be fantastic. But what we also know is that afterward, again, think about the pioneers in the room. The pioneers who have come, they've spent some time away from their office, they're in the classroom, and they learn all this stuff, and it all makes total sense while they're there, and they go back, and they don't have a peer, and they don't have a friend who also is practicing project management. And now they're on their own trying to explain to other people how this works, and they hit their first obstacle, and they struggle with a little bit, and then, you know, let's face it, there's a lot of work to be done, and then they put all that stuff on the shelf, and they go, you know, this is great, I'm going to do this. But you come back a year later, and they kind of, you know, give you a little smile and say, you know, that was great. I don't think it works here. And what I think what they're really saying is they didn't know how to make it work there. And that's why coaching is so incredibly important. So when you want to start, what I'm going to say, what really makes this stuff stick, and again, I'm sorry if there's only one pioneer in your organization. I know that makes it harder. But if you want to make this stuff stick, coaching is really important. Coaching is what makes it stick. It helps people to overcome those early obstacles. So ideally, you've got enough people in your organization that know project management, that the new people have somebody to turn to. But if you don't, you're not lost, okay? So if you don't, here's my top recommendation. And oh, by the way, I have to say, I think that this is one of the other things I like to tell people in our classes. Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly and awkwardly until you get it right. Now, a friend of mine here in town, Wallace Wilkins in Seattle, made that statement one night when I was watching him teach us how to do some active listening skills. And it just hit me that that's absolutely the message that we need to send our people out into the world with, which is just because you can't do it right on day one doesn't mean it's not worth practicing and failing at for a while until you get it right. Now, how do we do that? Let's take a look at what my favorite practice here. And this is establishing a community of practice. And I'm going to tell you two stories about this community of practice. One is literally, I belong to a choir in my church, and we found out that there was a couple of us guys, it happened to be, not there's anything, we were not excluding women, but it just turned out that when we were drinking beer one night, we found out that a couple of us guys played guitar, and we're not that good at it. But we said we should get together anyway and have some fun. And so we did. And we had fun. And so the next thing you know, somebody said, well, can I invite another friend of mine? And now we've got maybe half a dozen guys and women that'll show up every once in a while, and we'll sing some songs together, and somebody will say, hey, do you know that song by the Beatles, you know, the one that goes like this? And they'll, oh, yeah, I know that one, and we'll teach it to each other. And the fact is, even though it's pretty informal, I've gotten a lot better at playing guitar just by hanging out with that group. Now, that's pretty social, and frankly, if I was counting on that to make me a really strong guitar player, it'll be about 100 years at the rate we're going, because we're really mostly focused on having fun. But it has made me a better guitar player, and it's just because we get together and help each other out. But I want to tell you a story about project management that actually really does work. My local chapter of the Project Management Institute here in Seattle has a subgroup they call the PMO Roundtable, so Project Management Office Roundtable. We meet once a month, you know, and there's probably, you know, a couple of months in the summertime that we take off, but excuse me, we meet once a month. It's moderated, so we have a specific topic that we discuss when we meet. They even send out some reading, say, hey, you know, read this topic, read this web post, and then when we show up for 90 minutes, there'll be 20 to 40 of us that have a conversation about a specific topic. And my gosh, we take away so much from that. And we're all from different organizations. Okay, so we just volunteered to get together, and I think that anybody, this would be kind of one of the top things that I would recommend, and it's actually one of the things we often recommend to our customers if we know that they're kind of in this startup phase. And this is what I told the folks I met with yesterday is if you take our 2 or 3 day class and you don't have follow-up activities associated with it, you might as well not even take the class. But if you will at least commit to meeting with the people who took the class once a month and having a specific focused conversation about what they're learning about, you will start to build some momentum. And that community of practice, somebody's got to jump in and lead that, but that's not the hardest thing. People want to do that. You do that combined with training, and now you've started to get the ball rolling. And so instead of having that, as the diagram here shows, instead of the red line, that community of practice can act as that orange line that you're looking for. Okay. I'm curious to hear anybody else's comment about that experience. How have you taken project management out after the training and kind of helped build it without formal ownership, without a project management office? Anybody want to chip in on that?
Eric, whilst people are just having a chance to think about that, and it's a great question, and I completely agree, you know, whether it's formal, informal, this idea of just peer learning is incredibly helpful and powerful, because it's also close, I think, you know, for the NGO context, it's also getting the people who are close to the field, close to the project reality to talk about it and think, well, how can we make things a bit better or a bit faster? But one of the best examples I've seen is in Malawi, where working with World Vision, some of the trainers just sort of, they kept going, really. They were just keen and enthusiastic, so they started training their staff, and then they started training some more people and talking about it, helping each other, starting to help some other organizations. And one of their lead trainers has now been asked by the government to help set up a project management association for Malawi. So, you know, from a small start, you know, a lot can grow. Back to you, Eric.
John, that's a great example, and I think too that you'll note that when Lingos does their training, quite often they're training people to go out and be evangelists and to be advocates. And that's being an evangelist. We need that if we want to change practice. So is there anybody else who want to make a comment about that? Community practice, ask a question? Okay, good, thank you. And so let's see where it goes next. Now, here's where we're going to get back to Laura's question about how do we verify consistent practice. So consistent practice across projects. Once we start to say that we all know PM, right? We've read the same books or we've attended the same classes, we agree on scheduling techniques, risk techniques, and so forth, then what? And this is where we start to focus on consistency here. And what I want to emphasize is that process improvement, we've all heard that term, process improvement, it assumes a process. And so in the project management world, I want you to use a common project life cycle as the foundation for consistency. That means, now in this example here, I've got evaluate, define, plan, execute, and close. Now that's a pretty simple, pretty classic project life cycle. It says that, but what it recognizes is that there are certain project activities that we need to do in order to evaluate a project. And so once I have the blue boxes here, which is what are the major steps in my project, then I can start to create the actual specific practice. And there's nothing like a document template to reinforce that. Now, believe me, I've had people say, Eric, you know, project management is more than just a lot of document templates. Sure, it's a lot more than that. But if I don't have a document template, I can tell you we don't have consistent practice. So we can start small, and as you look here, I have not too many document templates that I'm going to, I'm going to have one, that's associated with each one of these phases, or in this case, two. Keeping it pretty simple, but again, in a community of practice, and notice that right now I'm just assuming that if I'm in any NGO, I'm at any location where there's 2 or more project managers are gathered, we can start to talk about how do we evaluate a project, what's the basis for deciding if we should even move forward on it. And then we can ask, how do we basically get our goals and constraints clarified and figure out who our stakeholders are, and so on. And so recognizing that we have these kind of standard phases that happen, and there's some very specific activities that we can then, some project management deliverables that we can create. That's the foundation for consistent practice. And so, to answer your question, Laura, that's what I'm looking for. And when I first start into an organization, if they're a new client, I'll ask them for this. I say, can you show me this? Can you show me either your practice, your phases, or can you show me your document templates? And can you tell me if anybody actually uses those? Well, now, of course, that's always, a lot of people have the templates. Not everybody actually uses them. So but that really is the difference between having a process and having consistent practice. But that's the next step. And it's actually not that challenging to pull these templates together. So I mentioned my book at the beginning of the webinar here. People who own my book have access to 20 different downloadable forms that are right there associated with the book. But I'm telling you, project management forms are abundant. You don't have to search very long on the internet to find many, many, many project management forms. So anybody who says, you know what, let's have a common practice, let's try to do it in a consistent way, it is not very hard to find these templates. What's really difficult is to sort of fine-tune them to be relevant to your organization. And I think that's where the community of practice focus comes in, to fine-tune these. But keep in mind that that's what process improvement is. Process improvement is not, oh, we figured it out once and we're done. It's, here's what we're starting with, and as we see things that we can get better at, we fix them. So we make the proposal better, we make our status report more meaningful, we take that risk log and make it a little more interesting. And that's the practice. Okay. So let's take it one step further and notice that now we're ready to talk about having an owner for project management. And I distinguish an owner for project management from the community of practice model by saying that this is somebody whose job in the organization it is to create some rigor, and who's going to be held accountable for, are we getting better at managing projects, and are our projects producing better results? Are they more efficient? Basically, do we get more bang for our buck? And so that's the next stage here, is to formalize it with an owner. And once you've done that, now you can add a little bit of rigor here with your life cycle. So you'll see what I've done is I've circled that between those phases. Now we can have some gates. And typically, when you have somebody who owns project management, they are authorized to ask everybody who's running projects to pause and take a look. Did I produce a good proposal before we go in and dive in and do the work? Did we approve that project, and and are we using some rigor? And of course, the thing that's important to recognize is that when you're looking at these gates, it's not the project management office, and I'm going to use that term as the owner of project management, even though you don't have to use that term. It could be that just that one one manager has that as part of their duties, is to run project management. But that one person isn't the one who's necessarily in charge and who okays the move through the gate, but it's that one person who organizes who is going to be approving those gates. So typically I want to have my sort of management or executive team involved in reviewing all projects at the gates. And that, again, raises the level of consistency, because now we don't just do it in sort of a common goodwill together, and as we do in a community of practice. Now we're actually being held accountable by our boss or by the organization to follow the practice. Okay, and here's and when you get to that point, there's often there's actually a lot of pushback because it starts to feel very bureaucratic. I'm not getting my projects done and spending all my time doing paper pushing. Let's put the pause on that conversation. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, so for right now, is there any questions about what I've introduced here? A consistent practice with gates, and you can really only have those gates if you've given somebody the responsibility of organizing the gate and the gate meetings and organizing project management.
Yeah, Eric, it's John here. I think this is a really helpful concept. This idea that there is this moment to pause, to stop, to take a look at the project. How are we doing? Are we on scope, on time? Do we need to make any changes? And I think in the NGO context, where you might have many, there are multiple stakeholders, it's also an opportunity to engage with those stakeholders just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. That any changes that we need to make have been agreed by the key stakeholders. So I think this can be an incredibly helpful idea, and that within a long project is one thing you find is that a lot of NGO projects can be going over 2 or 3 years. It's a way to break up implementation into smaller pieces, into, let's call them phases or stages, doesn't matter. And then at the end of, say, a quarter or 6 months, okay, let's review, let's think, let's find out what's out, let's learn. Is everybody okay with everything? Are we on the same page? And I think that's a way that can actually really help project teams stay in control of changes so that, the changes aren't in control of the team. Back to you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, John. You're absolutely right. When we're objective and we can step back for a minute, everybody can see the value of these checkpoints. When we are in the mode and we're the person that has to get ready for the checkpoint meeting and we're on the hot seat, those checkpoint meetings don't look like as much fun. But let's come back to that, the value and whether they're too bureaucratic in a little bit and how to make them more valuable. So now we finally get to the question of technology, and I think a lot of people equate, let's say, Microsoft Project with project management. Well, that's what I'm going to say is that's absolutely not true. It's finally time for us to think about technology and how it affects us in project management. So I would emphasize here that technology makes the critical connection between awareness and practice. Right away, what are we seeing today? We are using technology to connect ourselves. We could, without this technology of Blackbaud, we would not have this conversation. And what I've seen in the last 25 years of practice is that the practice of project management moves forward as the technology enables it. So many of the things that we take for granted and that are common practices, we only do them because it's easy to do them given the technology. And that's the role that technology plays. So it's actually quite significant. And when I see organizations that are not practicing project management, they're not doing risk management, they're not doing issue management, they're doing a poor job of keeping track of their documents, it's typically because of the tools they're using. It's not because they don't understand the concept. It's because they don't have the tools to do it. So tools, in that respect, become incredibly valuable. And as you try to not only enable people to be good project managers, but as you want to create a widespread consistency, tools also create, here's how we're all doing it. Now, and now as we think about that, though, let's notice that one of the first things we said is let the people learn how to do project management. And at that point, if somebody said, Eric, I really want to, I'm the only person in my organization who's doing this, but I want to use, and you can almost fill in the blank here because there's so many kinds of project scheduling tools out there. But I want to use Microsoft Project to do that. Is it too soon? I'd say no. Go do it. Use it. Make that your own personal tool and equip yourself with the technology that allows you to do all these things. And so there's that you know, as the individual people learn the concepts, allowing them to equip themselves with the right tools and technology makes perfect sense, and I would never stand in the way of doing that. But I will say that when it comes to creating the habit across the enterprise, across the organization about technology, you're going to take probably two big decision points. One is going to be the short term. Well, what can everybody do on their own without collaboration, without consistency? And again, you might see a couple of different tools that are basically doing the very same thing, but one person wants to use Workbench, and one person wants to use Project, and one person wants to use something else, Smart Sheets, and they're all using them to manage schedules. No harm done, right? But at some point, in order to get the organization as a whole to be more effective, you're going to go back and choose that right technology. And then when you do that, it'll encourage everybody. So think of technology as an enabler. But again, allow people to, don't hold them back. If they got a good tool they want to use, like, cut them loose, let them do it. And so my diagram that I would like to share with you to think about this is that
sorry, Eric,
over time...
it's John here. Could I just interrupt very quickly? There's got a question from Tika in the chat. If you could elaborate a little bit more on awareness.
Right. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry if I didn't pick up. Okay, good. In the previous slide, right. So what I mean about awareness is that in the classroom, we suddenly become aware of risk management, for example, and of the value of risk management. And, oh, I didn't realize that, and I think that's important now. I want to do it. That's what I mean by awareness. It's the gap between knowing I could do something about this and actually getting in the habit of doing it. So thank you. Thank you for that. Actually, and I realize that I've been skipping some of these comments in the chat here. One comment back here was something about the SharePoint webinar that I mentioned earlier. Excuse me, just a minute. Got a frog in my throat this morning. So actually, the SharePoint, without pitching SharePoint as a specific tool or anything, but later this week, and this is on Thursday, and you can, if you look at our website, versatilecompany.com, you get to the home page, you'll see that on Thursday there's going to be a webinar, and you're welcome to attend that. But we actually specifically talk about a tool, SharePoint, that I like because it's simple and I can use it to create consistency across my projects. We basically reverse this whole conversation. Instead of talking about how to create consistency and, oh, by the way, use technology, we kind of use technology. We look at technology in a specific example of that as how to create consistency. So that, excuse me, would be an interesting, might be an interesting webinar to watch if you care to learn a little bit more about kind of how you can use a specific technology to accomplish this goal. Now, what you're going to see then over time then the sophistication of your project management habits will evolve, and therefore your technology will also evolve. So the people, as it's just I'm just doing this by myself, or I've got a community of practice, versus now I'm starting to evolve forward to where I've got formality within the organization. That's really an evolution, and I think you have to accept that when you start, you're not going to go from 0 to 60 in 3 weeks. Allow yourself to be getting better a little at a time, and I think the frustration with that is, well, I just bought this expensive tool. I only want to buy this tool once, and all I can say is I'm sorry, but I think that the reality is that quite often we're not ready for the big tool. We need to start with the small tool, and we'll work ourselves up to bigger and stronger tools. Now, having said that, most of the technology out there isn't really all that expensive, I think, so that if we use it for a couple of years and we decide to upgrade, unfortunately, that's kind of the cycle that we're in with technology. But let's take it to the next level here. So we've done a quick recap here. Of what I've said so far. We want to have organizational habits. You start with training, but you support that training with coaching. And then a community of practice starts to pull it together. It gives you encouragement and helps you refine your practice. Okay? To create consistency, choose a project life cycle. Project life cycle is the process that makes process improvement possible. And then always view technology as an enabler. It's not the answer, but it does help you. It does actually help you apply the principles, and that's the role of technology. Now we've been focusing on the project level so far, but let's go and change our aperture as we wrap up here. We've been focused on project execution. We can learn to be good project managers. And then suddenly we realize that it's multi-project management that's holding us back. If you envision every one of these cars out here as a project in your organization, what you see is it doesn't matter whether your car is old or new, whether it can go 180 miles an hour or not, because frankly, every car there is restricted by its environment. We're having too many cars coming on the freeway and the capacity just isn't there. The resources don't exist for the project managers to really gain the efficiency they want. So in this case, what I want you to, we're going to come back to program and portfolio management. Okay, this is the conversations we introduced earlier. And this is where we start to pay attention to multi-project management. So after you get your project management ducks in a row and you think things are starting to go well, you will hit this traffic jam, and now it's time to think about these two things. Now, I will say that project portfolio management is absolutely its own journey, right? You can talk about that for an hour easily, but I want to emphasize it can start simply. And here's the thing that I recommend to anybody who hasn't done it yet, is simply make a list of all your active projects. Anything that people say they're working on right now, or that somebody, we can attribute cost to, or whatever makes it active, make a list of those projects. And for every one of those, these 4 pieces of information, I want to know who is responsible for this, who is the project manager, who's responsible for driving this to completion, when did it start, when should it finish, and what strategic objective should it support. That's all I want to know. And once I look at that, I actually probably have far more projects than I can hope to accomplish, but at least I have awareness of it now. So this is really the summary of this presentation right here, which is what you do to keep your whole project together. You kind of the whole big picture of starting. So as we said, it's the training, the coaching, the community of practice, and once you've done all of that, then list all your current projects, and every time you want to add something to that list, make sure that you're not dreaming, okay? Because if you've got a list of projects that is too big for the resources available, you have the greatest crime of all, and that is you are going to invest your very limited resources into projects that really have no hope of completion. And every dollar that you spend on a project that doesn't complete is a wasted dollar, because it's a dollar that could have been spent on another project that actually could complete. So projects that are started and not finished, it's a complete waste. And I got to tell you, that's kind of one of my current most common problems to solve right now in organizations that we work with. So I want to wrap up here by, is there any other questions? I think maybe there's one last thing I'd want to say about a project management office as we wrap up, and that is that we have the owner of project management. You don't have, this doesn't have to be super complex, but let me the owner of project management doesn't have to be a super complex thing to be a PMO, but the project management office owns the process, coaches and trains people at a minimum, and then their job is to be aware of portfolio and program management. Okay. Now I see a question, so Anna, I'm going to read your question. In our organization, we struggle with having consistency with the use of common tools. For a large organization, it seems that everyone has developed their own tools. How do you recommend that we address this? Well, first of all, large organizations often justify different tools. And by that I mean that if I've got, let's say, a supply chain group, they have different kinds of projects, and they ought to be having consistency within their group. So project management tools and practices don't have to be consistent across countries. For example, if you're a multi-country organization, or if you've got thousands of folks, you don't have to have a consistent practice across all of it. But what I do want is I want you to know that anybody who's working on projects that are like yours, those are the people that you ought to be pairing up with and having common tools and practices with. And so I think that there's a myth of continuity across the organization. It actually doesn't have to occur that way. What you have to do is figure out where your projects are similar, and those projects that have similar characteristics, that are serving similar stakeholders, that you can interchange your project managers with, for example. Those are the ones where you want to focus on consistency. And so what we often see in large organizations are multiple project management offices set up for that very reason. And again, excuse my frog in my throat. But thank you for that question. And you've got different funders. And I got to tell you, if I was a funder, I might have an emphasis around you got to do it my way. And that's something that, frankly, I'm a for-profit company, so I don't have a funder. But you know what I do have? I have customers. And every customer, they want it their way. Well, guess who wins? My customer wins, because I can't make them all do it the same. So when it comes to those external stakeholders, I adjust to their need. I think I'd like to say one last thing about PMO and project management, and then we'll wrap up for the day. This hour's gone really super quick, and I appreciate you being here. If you want to institutionalize project management in your organization, the top things that you can have to do is this. First of all, remember that the goal is not to have consistent processes. It's to deliver value to the people who are working on projects. And while we might say, well, the best way we deliver value is to have consistent practice, that might be our perception about how we deliver value. But in fact, what's most important is that we understand when it comes to the people who are working on projects and involved in projects, we are serving them. And as long as what we do feels valuable to them, then we're on the right track. Okay? Secondly, if there isn't strong sponsorship, somebody who has authority and enough budget to do something about project management, it will fade away. So strong sponsorship is the #1 success factor in any kind of organization about project management. The grassroots effort without some support from the top will it will be a very, very long journey, my friends. When it comes time to build, to have some kind of a leader and owner, they have to be a change agent as every bit as much as a project management expert. Okay, and know that efficiency and the effectiveness of project management do pay off, but they're not absolutely free. And I think firms struggle with this particularly when you've got this community of practice that's sort of operating for free, if you will, and then you try to formalize that, and you've got to pay people. Part of their job is to maintain project management practices, and next thing you know, it looks like it's totally overhead. You know what? You got to pay for that value that the PMO offers. But over the life of the PMO and the life of project management, again, number 5 is just a recap of number 1. As long as you view what project management does in your organization as a service to the people who are working on projects, they will feel that value as well. Okay. Now, again, we've spent an hour together. I totally appreciate you being here and letting me share my thoughts on how to build a strength in project management together. Would you, finish up with any kinds of questions you've got, and I will just put my last slide up here, which is kind of a recap of the whole thing, which is that, we've got to training and coaching is part of it. The processes have templates and gates. The technology needs to be specific to the problem at hand. And when it comes time to make this really happen, you've got to have an owner who's with a real strong sponsor.
Okay, Eric, thank you so much. Look, whilst people are thinking about possible questions, and do please put any questions, any thoughts, etc., in the chat. I mean, what you say really rings true for me, and it's interesting. I mean, I've seen a lot of NGO, let's call them project improvement processes, and I completely agree with that point about some sort of sponsorship and ownership. If that's not there, it is really, really hard, and it can almost be counterproductive as people start to experiment and try stuff and get enthusiastic, and they can only go so far, and then it gets stopped by the organizational inertia. And when I think of the really successful initiatives, there's been that senior sponsorship, a champion, somebody who really wants this to work, and they're able to help remove roadblocks and help support the people who are trying to run the projects. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you all that I'm a student of what works. I'm always a student of what works, and I would love to hear what's working for you. A couple of you have noticed that you've used my book, and I thank you for doing that. But you'll notice that in that book, over and over, I try to reference people that stories that I've heard, and so I'm constantly a student of what is working. And if you have a story about what's working, you want to share with me, I would love to hear it. So here's my my contact information right here, because that's really I don't think you want to learn. I don't think you want one man's experience. I think you want to get the collective experience. And so my job here in the world is to collect stories about what works and to pass them on. And I would love to hear yours.
That's fantastic. So do please share those stories. It is always a really. I just think it's incredibly motivating to to find out stories about what's working in different sectors, and you can actually read a selection of little mini case studies here. I've just put a link in for you. And Lisa was asking about World Vision, and that's an interesting one because World Vision have managed to do it in some places where they had the sponsorship, but at other levels they haven't had it, and that's where I think there have been challenges. So I just wanted to quickly comment on that question, Lisa, and I'm happy to chat more about it. But I am aware that we are over the allocated time. So, Eric, I just really wanted to thank you, for taking, the time and the trouble to share your experience and knowledge with us. I found it incredibly helpful, very useful, making lots of notes, really good conversations with people in the chat as well. And I really would recommend, everybody do have a look at Eric's book. You can see people in the webinar said, actually, that template is helpful, and if it works for you, share it. That way everybody can learn. And Lingos is all about finding ways to help, to share, so that we can learn together. So, once again, Eric, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. This is why we do it. Because we want to find ways to, just to share knowledge and experience. this is the last webinar for this year, but we will be starting them up again in January. So please look out for the alerts, the messages about the webinars, and we are going to be sending a survey out to everybody as well. And if there are topics that you would like us to run a webinar on, please let us know. We're really happy to do that. So thank you so much, everybody. Over and out.